Okay, good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all of you that are here. I'd like to say a big thanks for all of you to be here this morning. There's a few empty seats. We hope a few more people will join over the course of the morning. But we're happy to have you here at this morning's session, and we want to very briefly introduce our main panel, just so that you can see who they're here. But I'll then try to give a few opening remarks, followed by opening remarks from each of the panelists, and then we'll have a question and answer session for that. We do want to try and make this a little interactive, so there will be time for questions from the audience. So please, when you're listening in, if you've got a question, write it down, and we can ask during the question and answer session. If you give your name and the organization you're with, we'll try and make sure it's participatory. But the panel with us today here, we have Mr. Nambi Apparadai, who's the WRI Director from India, joining us today, so pleasure to have you here. We have Mr. Leal Randini, who's with the Ministry of Environment with Sri Lanka as the Director of Climate Change Secretariat. We have Dr. Shin, who's working with the Presidential Commission on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth here in the Republic of Korea, and he's acting as the Chairperson of the Climate Change Adaptation Subcommission. Followed by Mr. Sanjay Kumar Bhowmik, who's with the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change from Bangladesh. Pleasure to have you here. And last but by no means least, Ms. Maria Holzberg, who is the Deputy Regional Director for UN Women. So thank you very much for all joining us here today. So to start with, I think our task here today is to explore the interconnectedness of the 5 enablers of climate adaptation and resilience building. And these are namely policy and governance, planning and programming, science and assessments, technologies and practices, and finance and investments. It sounds like 5 has turned into 10, but there's a lot of complicated issues to deal with. And these interconnected enablers drive and shape each other, so that if we're focusing on only 1 or 2 of these to the detriment of the others, we're not going to be able to provide successful adaptation outcomes. But it's also worth digging deeper into what we consider successful climate adaptation. Successful adaptation does not only depend on these 5 enablers, but also it recognizes the interconnectedness and how it's not just influenced by these interlinked enablers, but also by the interconnectedness of our societies, our economies, and indeed our ecosystems. So in a globalized world, an impact from climate change in one country or one community, it can generate risks to people in another, not just passing between the neighboring countries, but often cascading across countries, sometimes thousands of miles apart. And this can affect and disrupt trade and supply chains. It can affect food security. It can affect migration and indeed the livelihoods of many people. So we need to understand these cascading and complex issues. Our adaptation efforts can also have unintended consequences, often beyond the places that we're implementing. So they're transferring risks to other communities or other groups, sometimes redistributing rather than reducing vulnerabilities. And we can also see an increase, unfortunately, in maladaptation, signalled as recently signalled in the IPCC reports, where maladaptation can worsen existing inequities, especially for already marginalised people, including women, indigenous communities, and people living in multidimensional poverty. So we have to address that. So maybe successful adaptation to climate change cannot simply be measured by the speed of policy development, which needs to speed up, nor by the increased funds that are being unlocked for adaptation, which again need to be increased. But a better way for us to look at success would be to judge it in terms of whether the processes and outcomes are living up to the call resilience for all. So not too long ago, I think there was a report in Nature by Johan Rockström, and looking at the stability and the resilience of Earth systems and human well-being are being inseparably linked. So we need to make sure that we work across all of these in a holistic manner. And he provided a 3-fold framing where they defined resilience for all in terms of intra-generational, for all of us who are here now. Are we being inclusive about the needs of all people? Are we making sure that they're included in, responded to, and served by these enablers? They talked about intergenerational, caring for and providing for future generations. And lastly, they talked about all species and planetary systems, looking at interspecies justice and Earth system stability. So we can see we're dealing with a very complex situation. And the key issue here is that when we look at the record of past and present adaptation efforts, sadly we see many shortcomings persisting that do not enable resilience for all. We see very few adaptation practices that can manage cross-border and cascading climate risks, especially accounting for our interdependence in this way. And even fewer are effectively inclusive in terms of the processes that meaningfully engage people of all genders and socially marginalised and most climate at-risk people. So a lot of challenges for us to move forward. And if we don't do this with their knowledge and their input, the communities and people at risk can add such value to our thinking and planning. And if we don't do this properly, solutions to any of these 5 enablers are likely to be less effective in the long run. So to address this, we need interconnected, inclusive and equitable adaptation. And to achieve this, there's a number of principles we should follow. One, looking at adaptation, and based on national risks and vulnerability assessments, we need to take into account the impacts of climate change beyond the country's borders. We need to consider how these impacts could put national development plans at risk, whether they're health plans, trade plans, agricultural goals, even diplomatic relationships. We need to make sure we're not causing problems further down the road. We also have to look at adaptation, and based on the explicit goal of resilience for all, which is what we're pushing for today, we must ensure that we engage enablers in ways that prioritise people who have contributed the least to climate change and yet are the most at risk. We must ensure that plans that are drafted and implemented not only are done by environmental ministries, but we need to make sure that trade, agriculture, social and gender, finance, foreign ministries are all integrated into this whole of government approach to supporting climate adaptation. This will give it more political prominence and hopefully better buy-in to developing a resilience for all. But fundamentally, adaptation and implementation plans must be designed with and based on the needs, knowledge and risk preferences of the people who have contributed least to climate change and yet are the most at risk. And these are obviously including the women, indigenous communities, people living in multidimensional poverty, and indeed our youth who are inheriting the challenges that we're leaving behind. So it's important that we look at these plans and policies and try to listen to, on top of all of that, the latest evidence-based science supporting adaptation, to make sure we're looking at robust assessments and knowledge and driving it from the scientific perspective. We also need to then push the international community to accelerate climate finance to support all of this. Just reading in the newspaper this morning, fossil fuel subsidies reached 1.3 trillion last year. What has gone into adaptation? How are we going to compete against things like that? So how do we get the international community to put the money where it's needed? So bringing it back to the panel here today, the whole idea of this panel is looking at the creating of resilient societies capable of adapting to the impacts of climate change is a complex task. We know that. The challenges of dealing with the interlinkages amongst policy, amongst science, technology, planning and climate finance is not going to be an easy task, and we shouldn't underestimate it. So that's why we're going to ask these esteemed panelists some challenging questions to try and understand how we can address these issues. So before we get into discussions, I'd like to hand it over to each of you in turn, just to have a 3-minute introduction of you, your work, and some of the key elements you want to highlight. Then we'll have a Q&A. So, Nambi, we'll hand it over to you first.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nambi Appadurai. I lead the Climate Resilience Practice of World Resources Institute, India office. And I think you gave a wonderful overview, Niall, to start with. And a couple of things which comes to my mind is, one, when you talk about climate change, the 2 things which are part and parcel of it. One is uncertainties associated with that. The second one is the interconnectedness. I mean, even the climate change is an action of interrelationship between stratosphere, biosphere. It starts there, as you know. And then certainly the enablers have whatever has been picked up as 5 important enablers are interconnected in many ways. But it's not that, everything operates in tandem. That we need to kind of really recognize that, because it's all contextually driven. Certain places, couple of enablers which has been identified could be playing a greater role, but in certain circumstances, they cannot converge together. That's where the problem is. It is a problem of mainstreaming adaptation into development policies, practices. We've been talking about this for so many years now, almost a decade now we spent on that. We are getting in there. It's not that, everything's doomed there, but still, it's a long way to go. That's why the scale matters. I also see that we have spent a lot of time on the transformative adaptation the past 2 days. Lots of discussions have happened on this front. Certainly, these enablers contribute to that process in a bigger way, but we need to really tweak them to the circumstances. That's very, very important. Another thing is about scale. The scale, we are so obsessed with NAPS. Nevertheless, it's important. I'm not critical about the NAPS process, but then there are countries like India need to really focus on the sub-national level activities, because that's where we are moving in, if the implementation process is moving to the sub-national level, because adaptation is such a local phenomenon. So we should recognize that and more coins based on that. It's important to recognize that the value in integrating at the local level, because it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. Where it meets is important. I'll stop here, and we'll come back to that. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. First, I thank APAN Forum for inviting Sri Lanka for this session. So I'm Leel Randeni, Director Climate Change Secretariat, that is there in the Ministry of Environment. So it is the focal point for the UNFCCC. So I'm joining this plenary discussion, very important juncture as far as our climate action is concerned in Sri Lanka, because these days we are involved in National Adaptation Plan revision that is to be with effect to be effective from 2025 to 2034, 10 years plan. And we have immediately launched our NDC implementation plan. And at the same time, we have produced our first national policy on climate change in 2012, and nowadays we are in revising that. So it's very critical time that we are joining this. I like to share my experiences under this transformational adaptation and deepening our focus for this, because we are one of a very highly vulnerable country, comes into the first 10 countries under this categorization based on climate risk index. So although we are an island state in the tropical belt, although we have had a lot of national plans and all, I like to share my experience with that. We have a long way to go, mobilizing different stakeholders and mobilizing finances and all to achieve these NDC targets. Yes, I will share my experiences during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Dr. Shin.
Okay, nice to meet you. I'm Hyun-Suk Shin. Actually, I want to introduce me by my project file. Can you open the...
We have a small presentation he shared. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, today I want to say about just 3 things, keywords. And then one thing is that how we can transform our city related with the climate change adaptation. And then second one is that what we can adapt or use the green and smart technology. And then third one is that how we can manage and control the urban designing and planning in terms of the urban transformation. And then actually I have 2 jobs. I have 3 jobs. One job is that I worked for the Busan National University for 30 years as a professor. And then my major was the urban environment and climate change. Actually, the scientific major is the hydrology from the Colorado State University about 30 years ago. And then nowadays, I'm working for the local government, Busan, which is the 2nd city in Korea. As you know, Busan is the ocean city. Therefore, we are very interested in and focused on the damages and the adaptation of the climate changes because of the increasing sea levels and the increasing floods and also a shortage of the waters. And then nowadays, I'm working for also the governmental division, which is the Presidential Committee on Carbon Neutrality and the Green Growth. I will explain my experience for the discussion more in terms of the governmental planning scheme and also local scheme related to the climate change adaptation. And then today my question is that our city is sustainable. As you know, this is the Busan city. Left one is the old town, and right one is the new town. If you visit the Haeundae beach, this is one of the best beach in the Korea. But the left side, about 70 years ago, Korea have the very bad history, which one is the Korean War. Therefore, that bad town have been built for the 70 years after Korean War and World War II. Therefore, that's the big problem. There are so many problems related with the urban designing and also climate adaptation. And then, as you know, the Korea developed the economy about 600 times during the 30 years. Therefore, because of the fast development, we faced about two problems, a bad urbanization and also the bad adaptation of the climate change. Therefore, we are faced about the environment and the climate change and also the natural disaster problems around the Busan area. As you can see, the last photo is the Haeundae beach about 50 years ago. And then right photo was the recent photo of the Haeundae beach. You can compare how big difference between 30 years ago and now. And then right one is the green smart city, which is one of the important Busan city motto, or like how we can do to transform the Busan area. I suggest to the major we should adapt the climate change problems, and also we should use the green and the smart technology and industries, both of them, to overcome our problems in Busan. And then, in my opinion, there are four necessities for the sustainable green smart cities. First one is that how we can improve the our old infrastructures to smart infrastructures. And then second one is that how we can use the smart technology to overcome the climate change and also the enhancing the people's lives. And then third one is that how we can make our city from the gray city to the green city. As you know, that there are so many roads and the buildings are still green, are still grays, which make the big problems of the floods and also high temperatures because of the climate changes. And then final one is that how we can make our transformation together, holding the weak peoples and also some old industries to go to the green smart cities.
1 minute.
And then, yes, finally, I want to say nowadays the Busan is working to hold the 2030 World Expo theme. And then, as you can see, World Expo theme is containing the three concepts: green, and smart, and sustainability. And thank you so much. And then I will talk more about my experience related with climate change adaptation in the local version and also a governmental version in Korea. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Mr. Bomik.
Very good morning. And also thanks moderator and respected speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great opportunity for me. And for me, that this is Additional Secretary Sanjay Kumar Bomik. I'm working 5 years long on behalf of adaptation and mitigation. As you know that in the field of adaptation, if you think, Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. And we are facing disasters one after another. And sea level rise, due to sea level rise, 1/3 of our coastal area facing salinity intrusion and major threat for agriculture. And as you know that Bangladesh is a densely populated country. And the country is now agriculture, food security, of course, major concern for Bangladesh. But as you know that we are in line with keeping 1.5 degree alive. Bangladesh submitted 2015 first NDC and updated its NDC in 2021 in keeping 1.5 degree alive ambitious NDC will reduce 22% of our global emissions by 2030. And in the field of adaptation, as you know, that we recently submitted our National Adaptation Plan, 27 years plan. And in this National Adaptation Plan, our priority is the 8 sector we identified. In 8 sectors, agriculture and also water resources sector is our major thrust area. And what actually we identified 6 pillars, objectives to achieve Bangladesh in the NAP vision in 27 years. And in our NAP vision, mainly we are climate resilient agriculture, how we ensure it, and also climate smart cities. And climate smart agriculture is our major priority in our adaptation. And if you say the adverse impact of climate change, the answer, what actually the answer? This is very complex. But it is true that global emission and human activities mainly responsible for climate change adverse impact is true. AR6 report clearly mentioned that we need to intervention. And because we are the responsible person and we need to find out the solutions. And one thing I want to clear that in front of us COP28, before COP28 we need to GGA goals target is yet to not finalized. And another thing, we believe that in this COP, loss and damage fund, we believe that we need to finalize this issue is the 2 major issues in COP28 regarding this. And another thing that in our adaptation plan, as you know that Bangladesh in our coastal area, we are now targeting to high-level resilient housing. How to face this issue in our coastal region is our major target. And in our, one of the, as you know that in support with UNEP, we are now, UNEP Copenhagen Center, we are now 2 components. One is climate resilient housing in our coastal area, and another component is renewable energy. We are working on this. And another thing that, as you know, that Bangladesh is a country, in 2009 we developed our Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy Action Plan. And under this plan, we create Bangladesh Climate Change Fund. And with this fund, in 10 years long, from 2010 to 2023, we invest from our domestic resources is more than 490 million US dollar. And under these domestic resources, we already more than 850 projects implemented all over the country and mainly give priority on adaptation and mitigation also. This is the success story for Bangladesh. And another thing that, as you know, that in Bangladesh, we are adopted our disaster management rules and we adopted Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, and giving priority on adaptation is in our context, in our Delta Plan, 100 years plan. And also we have recently, we identified in our National Adaptation Plan, 230 billion needed in 113 actions. We identified in 27 years plan. And another document we recently published under CBF Forum. As you know that it's a 56 countries forum, Bangladesh Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. And this prosperity plan basically what actually, as you know that from vulnerability to resilience, resilience to priority, we give priority in our Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. With this note, I now want to add, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And last but by no means least, Maria.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's here. Thank you to the APAN colleagues and to the colleagues on stage. It's really wonderful to hear your perspectives. I am from UN Women, and the theme today is, sorry, I needed to put my timer. Stickler for time. We're talking about the interconnectors of enablers for climate change adaptation. And I would almost propose that we can talk about it in the context of prerequisites, because we actually can't do without bringing these enablers together. And I wanted to draw attention to the keynote from the opening ceremony talking about the impacts of climate and the need for adaptation. And he mentioned issues related to poverty, the lack of funding, climate-sensitive livelihoods, and accountability. So I will now tell you that the most severe and disproportionately impacted by with of these impacts are women in all their diversity. They usually have a bigger care burden. Their care burden increases during climate-induced events. They work in climate-sensitive livelihoods, and they have the least access to decision-making. So, what do we think is the solution to all these prerequisites? I will today share with you a couple of examples, but it's centered on a program that UN Women is doing with our dear sisters in UNEP, focused on women for climate resilient societies. And this links and ensuring and enabling a policy environment with national policies on climate change, renewable energy, and disaster risk reduction that are gender responsive. It's words that are hard to unpack, but it means that gender is at the center or included in the policies. We're talking about planning, creating an enabling environment for women's groups and civil society groups to integrate and engage with government and those that are developing these adaptation plans. We're working on technology and financing by advancing carbon neutral technology for resilient livelihood for women. This is simple things like solar panels or solar pumps, irrigation, but facilitating this climate-sensitive livelihood that these women entrepreneurs are engaging in. We're also linking with science, so we look at the data and work together with national statistics agencies, institutions to build data users and data and create the data itself on the impacts. I have 5 seconds. So the keynote yesterday talked about risk propeller, which I thought was an amazing concept that I shall steal forever now, where the risks are reinforcing and compounding each other. I would argue, too, that the enablers that we're discussing today, which I have reframed as prerequisites, are the solutions. And from UN Women's side, and from many others, we want to see that women in all their diversity are at the center. And then let's see what happens, because we haven't played that game just yet when we're talking about the adaptation plan. So let's look at that as a mindset and a frame. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your opening remarks. I think there's a lot of really interesting topics that we'll probably come back to in some of the questions and maybe pick a little deeper onto some of those. Just to remind the audience, if you do have questions, we will have a Q&A session after the initial kind of panel discussion, so please get your questions. But if we can start off now just by asking the panel, and maybe directing towards the governments initially, what do you think are the challenges you face in designing policies, in creating effective and inclusive government arrangements in an attempt to support enablers and in an attempt to drive adaptation? And maybe if you have an example of how this works. And then I'd specifically maybe ask Dr. Shin, that was an interesting example. You talk about Busan and the development of the city, 400 times economic growth over 50 years. How do you ensure inclusion and participation in that process?
Thank you so much for asking to me. I'm a first hitter, right? Okay, thanks so much. Actually, I want to say about 2 things. The most important thing for the governance and the management of the climate change adaptation. First one is that how we can break our sectors, getting into the one team. That is very important thing. In my experience about the 4 big river restoration projects from 2008 to 2012, I was working for like a technical advisor to the government for the river restoration projects, big river restoration projects. At the time, we made the control towers. combining the all technological sectors or governmental sectors. In terms of the technical sectors, I suggest to the government we should work together containing the urban designer or environmental engineer and also financial advisor or industry guys working together. And then second one is that at the times we tried to use the innovative technologies, because if we can use the green or smart technologies, which I said the innovative technologies, we can make our industries better, which called green growth industries. That means that if we can make the flood reduction and increasing water storages and also increasing water fronts, then people can think they can work in the climate change adaptation projects. Therefore, we use the innovative technology and industries. And the third thing is that I think at that times we worked for the citizens and the governmenters and also financial guys together. But the most problem is that there are so many sectors who are interested in the projectors. Therefore, we made our effort how we can make the cooperation team, something like that. Therefore, I want to say for the governmental projects in terms of the climate change adaptation, making control tower and using the innovative technology and industries, then collaborating the citizens and all sectors, that is very important thing in my experiences. Okay.
Thank you for that. Mr. Leal or Sanjay, have you comments from government perspectives?
As you know that adaptation is a big problem, specifically a country like Bangladesh. But what actually is not whole of government approach. We need whole of society approach with this big issue. But one thing that private sector involvement is a major challenge, I believe, because private sector now involved in mitigation, they're thinking that this is profitable issue. But in case of adaptation, they believe profit, there is no profit. So involvement of private sector is a major challenge. And another thing that, as you know, that integration and mainstreaming of all documents. What I earlier mentioned, that we have number of strategic action plan documents to mainstreaming all these, integrating in the mainstream is of course a major challenge. And one thing positive is that during preparation in our NAP, we give priority as gender, indigenous people, and to give bottom-up approach, because we believe that nature-based solution, traditional system, we respect them, our rural people during preparation to make them awareness and ownership of adaptation process is one of the success story we believe that. And as you know that in Bangladesh, people are very much resilient. And the stories say that when during cyclones, if we see that in 1970 cyclones, 1 million people died. But at the same dimension, when cyclones hit our coastal area, the casualty now below 10, below 100. This is one of the success stories. Why it is possible? As you know that in our coastal area, more than 4,200 cyclone shelters. And another thing, that more than 76,000 climate CPP volunteers always ready, and maximum of them is women. And they did a lot during recovery and to collect those people who are in the vulnerable areas within 1 day. And early warning system dissemination is fantastic in Bangladesh. And that's why we are now combating our casualty during disaster. Is some success story of Bangladesh, I believe that. Another thing, as you know, that our Honorable Prime Minister, his own initiative, in coastal area, we take a biggest cyclone shelter for climate victims. This is, we call Kruskul Housing Project, 6th floor, multi-stored, 139 buildings, and more than 4,200 families will giving shelter in these places. This is under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister. And another thing that we give priority in agriculture sector, as you know, the salinity issue due to our agriculture scientists now giving stress-tolerant varieties is the priority area. And though Bangladesh is a very small country with more than 170 million population, by every year we're producing 37.5 million only paddy in this small country. To challenge the food issue is, of course, I believe that this is one of the success story. And what actually you see that the finance flow is the access to finance is a major challenge. Like as you, I earlier mentioned that in our National Adaptation Plan, we need 230 billion by 27 years to implement all these projects, what actually identified, 113 projects identified. And to make it, as you know, that every year our GDP loss due to adverse impact of climate change, it is now 1.3%. And it is widening ADB report said that if we not take any actions, then up to 2100, we have to lose more than 9% of GDP every year. And keeping with this mind, we are now adopted this National Adaptation Plan. And another thing, as you earlier mentioned, the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, we also give that we need more than 49 billion from 2021 to 2041. But this finance flow, and another thing that in our updated NDC, with that 15% of our global GHG emission will reduce by conditionally. But as you know, that 100 billion commitment by global community yet not met up. And this is need finance to address all these issues country like Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to a finance question at the end. I think it's really important, but Il.
Yes, thank you. Adding to that thing, you know, we are an agricultural country. So our most of the, workforce is involved in agriculture, livestock, and all those activities. So we are in a tropical belt. So our major, climate stresses are floods and droughts, because our most agricultural areas are there in dry zone. It is 2/3 of the country. Then our capital, Colombo, and all those things are in the wet zone. So our climate projection is that our wet zone will be more wetter, dry zone will be more drier. So we have tuned our climate action mainly to the, to rescue our people's lives and livelihoods, so water sector and like that. So, so we have these 10 different adaptation sectors mainly. Our challenge in governance and this policy is that we have, it is, as other speakers explained, it should be a multi-stakeholder approach. We have to engage others with our climate action. And at the same time, we have to try our best to make this climate action, adaptation, transformation into their basket. So it will be their program. So the community would feel that it is my work. So we are benefiters. So their resources are mobilized, and at the same time, private sector. Or I don't think that private sector doesn't have profits, but there are profits, because there are some of the private sector companies. Their most destination, their product destination is in the first world. They contribute the climate action in Sri Lanka is that it by several fold it increases their green image. So they get some supernormal profits that they are contributing to a developing country climate action. So like that, different stakeholders, we should have different means to mobilize them with our action, and at the same time they should feel that they are also part and parcel of that. The community, our communities are resilient really because of this modernization and at the introduction of the market exchange system, and we have degraded a lot of our cultural values and all those things. But traditionally, conventionally, in our rural areas, if you visit there, a lot of biodiversity is protected, and at the same time, they were resilient. But what happened with this modernization and industrialization? Parallelly, we became more vulnerable and we are prone to the risk. So we have to mobilize our traditional knowledge, indigenous initiatives into the modern climate discourse. We are having some of the tools to mobilize them. While I will explain while we are going on. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just maybe ask Marie then, looking at from your perspective at UN Women, what do you think is a strong enabling environment to drive this policy and governance?
What do you think I will say? Thank you, and I just want to also, the points that you've raised are really, really excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Strong enabling environment means women at the table, and diverse women who does not know the word adaptation. They don't know that word, but they do it, and they do it every day, and they do it every year as the climate impacts come over their communities. And just to make it more concrete, one thing that we from UN Women's side are seeing is that it's very, very hard to measure women's leadership, or it's very hard to unpack what that actually means. It doesn't mean you just bring a woman to the table and then they sit and then you disregard them. We've developed a methodology to really unpack what what meaningful engagement and meaningful leadership actually means. And it's not very fun when we apply this tool into different contexts, because we note that if women are at the table, they may not be listened to, or they may not be properly resourced. So there's recognition that it's important to be gender responsive in an adaptation plan, but it may not be incorporated because there's not enough funding to put in that extra effort to make sure the adaptation plan actually looks at what will support women. I think a strong enabling environment must sit within policy and government, needs to be accountable and transparent, meaning that you will see the changes that you're asking for from a community perspective. It needs to be contextualized, and this is where the policies that happen on a government capital level need to be translated into subnational and community levels. It needs to be adaptable, of course, to the different contexts, but also evidence-based. And when we say evidence-based, we want to look at the impact of diverse groups. So women, marginalized women, women living with disability, people with different gender identities. These are all community members of this globe, and we are all accountable to them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And understanding this gender responsive, maybe we can keep pushing to gender transformative approaches and encourage more and more integration of ideas in these discussions. A lot of people tend to talk about we're making gender aware. You know, we're gone beyond that. Gender responsive is great, but we need to even go beyond that and support gender transformative approaches. So we can only encourage it for everybody to follow. But I'd like to just move on and maybe ask Nambi another question around sharing your ideas. I think we talked very briefly about the work that you're doing at WRI about climate-proofing adaptation plans. But can you kind of highlight some of your experiences around going beyond the development of these plans and programs, the inclusion and the linking with governments to make it successful?
Thank you, Neil. You know, we at WRI India work very closely with the subnational governments, about 5 states we are working closely with. One of the states is Tamil Nadu, where we see lots of forward momentum now because of the kind of leadership. I think it is important to recognize it doesn't stop with these 5 enablers. There are other things like leadership and, most importantly, capacity building. These are very critical for transformative adaptation. So I think one of the examples is, as I mentioned, is Tamil Nadu, where there is a very proactive government. You know, first time we've been struggling hard for the past 5 years to establish this, and somehow we managed to convince them in terms of importance of having a climate proofing of district development plans. Because it's typically, all these plans are looked through a development lens. As you all know, it's nothing new, but we need to bring the climate angle to that. We pilot tested this in 2 districts of Tamil Nadu, where we kind of brought in the district officials, about from 20-odd departments, and about a 2-day, 3-day session to understand their priorities, and because there's a scientific component as well. We need to really start with the vulnerabilities of those districts to start with, and then see what their understanding is, perspectives, and match with those native knowledge what they have. Because these people are district officials day in and day out. They've been in touch with the communities, local communities. So it's important to kind of, bring that knowledge to the bearing of whatever the plan process what we have. Interestingly, first ever time a bureaucrat sat for 3 days listening to this. Very rarely it happens. And she saw the value of this, great leadership, and then she went back in the 2 districts, whatever implemented, she was part and parcel of this work and saw the value of it. And then she went and kind of rolled out, scaled it up to 38 districts across Tamil Nadu. It is a struggle we had for 5 years. It's very heartening to see these kind of things happening. Again, I mean, it's one thing to have a government order issued on this, but then how to implement is another question. Parallelly, she created an institutional structure within the districts. At least, start with. I don't know where it's going to head. Once the leadership is gone, she's transferred, things might be different again. We have to start from, that's how the government works, but then, we have to factor that. We all know how it functions. But then, that is why we also brought the second line department leaders as well, not because the knowledge does not be rested with one particular group of people. The institutional memory is also important. So that's really a very good example of where we go to, how we kind of transform certain things. And also, one of the other important thing when you talk about adaptation is the entry points. I mean, the sense of history is very, very important when you talk about adaptation. That's why, we can't really completely bring alien technology as something which should be kind of, embedded in the existing systems in some way or other. That's also an important learning what we had, the appropriate technology, the flexible policies as well, what you call as adaptive management. I mean, it's easier said than done, but certainly it is important for them to tweak the policies according, because adaptation is moving target, and climate change is very unpredictable. So it's important to kind of tweak your policies accordingly. And then above all, strong synergies between the community-based governance systems, arrangements, and the decision-making at the provincial and national level is very, very critical. That's an important lesson what we learned. And lots of hand-holding is happening. The district collector, who is the head of the district, he's been completely involved wherever we are working in. I mean, that's the way it should be. And let's see where it takes us. But there is a very buy-in moment. We are so happy about this. We want to replicate this across. There's a huge demand across India to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that positive example, and good to learn more about that. And maybe, as you mentioned earlier, how do you scale that up now to the rest of India and also to various countries? But maybe just to open this question to various other government representatives, can you share how your governments are planning adaptation programs across ministries and in an inclusive way? Anybody want to take that from government? Lil?
You're asking how we can incorporate it into other ministries and other sectors?
Across ministries and maybe in that inclusive process.
Yeah, sure. As I told you, that now we are in the process of, updating, amending our already developed policy documents for, our climate action. That means the adaptation and mitigation also. Also, National Adaptation Plan and NDC Implementation Plan. And we have 2050 Net Zero roadmap and the strategic plan, and all those things are in place nowadays. So we have identified there are about 9 different sectors in adaptation sectors. Those sectors are food security. Let me say. So these are 9 vulnerable sectors identified in Sri Lanka. Food security. Food security means agriculture, livestock and fisheries. We have amalgamated, that is the most important sector. Water resources, coastal and marine sector, health sector, human settlements and infrastructure, ecosystems and biodiversity, tourism and recreation, export agriculture and industry, energy and transportation. So, so these sectors were, some of the different subsectors were merged together based on their similarity and their adaptation similarities. So, when we are planning these main documents, we have we have undergone through a comprehensive consultation with these line agencies. I mean, we have network of national focal points, national sectoral focal points, Transport Ministry, Tourism Ministry, Ministry of Industries, Ministry of Health, like that. So there are also have their sectoral policies and plans and all those instruments. So then what we are trying to do is that for sectoral perspective, we are going to incorporate our climate action plan, our adaptation action plan into food sector, agriculture sector, like that. So we are designing all those things together, and at the same time, we are making them into our policy programming, policy planning process also. So there are some disparities, but we are matching our objectives together. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Just one thing I want to add, that as you know, that climate change is a cross-cutting issue. And in our country, 26 ministries divisions now working together in the field of adaptation and mitigation. And if you see that in our budget allocation, from our ADP in 2015-16 budget, just only 7,000 crore. But now, within 13 years, it is raised to 37,000 crore climate change allocation, and these all ministries now working to address, like Water Resources Ministry, Agriculture Ministry with the major, and also local government division, power division, or energy division, all now related with works with these projects. And earlier I mentioned that in our specifically Climate Change Trust Fund, more than 850 projects, these projects implemented by all ministries, because we believe that climate change issues is not only issue of one ministry and not only for Bangladesh. Is also, I again state that is a transformative system, regional, global, Asia Pacific region now need to work together. One thing that in case of flood, it's not only issue of Bangladesh, it's issue of transboundary issue, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, all together. And that's why innovative ideas, solutions now need to share with all other countries. And ICIMUD, another world platform, SAKEP, another platform for Bangladesh, we work together to address these issues. And with this, I believe that actions, and this is very much solutions, and we give priority to our local community, what she said, and also gender responsive, because I believe that women are the most vulnerable during disaster. And that's why in all our plans, we giving priority to Women Affairs Ministry also to address all this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can keep the next response short, please go ahead,
Yes.
Jin.
Thank you so much. Actually, just a few months ago, Korea have been affected by the big monsoon flood in the mainland. Actually, the damage have been, the deaths and economic damage have been under the tunnel from the water, from the rivers. And then at the time, there are two problems. One problem is that the river have been managed by the Department of Environment, and then on the tunnel, transportation tunnel, have been controlled by the Department of Land and Transportation. And then a disaster, for the disaster management, have been controlled by the Department of the Interior or Police Department. They did not connect. Well, then they cannot send their message for the emergency cases to the people under the tunnel. That event occur every year in the Korea, also in the world, which means that I think, as I said to you, we need to improve our management and control of the climate change adaptation in the city. We need the control tower. Therefore, about 2 years ago, Korea made the national carbon neutrality and green growth law. And then just last year, the presidential committee have been started. Then in that committee, we are thinking about how we can collaborate from the several sectors: water, agriculture, urban designing, and also some industry sectors. Therefore, nowadays, we are making the very strong act and some plan for the climate change adaptation. In that master plan or act plan, we push it to them. Two things. One thing is that never walk alone. For example, for the Department of Environment or for the Department of Land and Transportation, work together and make the result and solution in one textures. And then second thing is that we are asking to them, you should work with the local government. Usually, as you know, the central government and the local government are very divided in terms of the managing the countries and managing the natural disaster problems. Therefore, we are pushing two things: work together and also work with the local government. That is our recent process for the managing the climate change adaptation plan.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
so
for that. And I think it highlights a key issue that even the challenges of working within ministries, across ministries, and then the further challenge of working across country boundaries and looking at how we do adaptation at that scale. I know there is a meeting later today that's looking at this across adaptations without borders, so maybe join that. But to jump maybe forward, if I could ask our colleagues Maria and Nambi, looking at I know when I asked a question, you kind of push back a little bit, but scientific knowledge or gaps that we have that are preventing us from doing good adaptation plans. But if it's not a lack of knowledge or that we have, what are the gaps? What are the constraints stopping us from pushing forward adaptation? So whoever's first, Nambi?
Yeah. I think this is one of the important barriers I see at the subnational level, because this information flow is not there. Even if the flow is there, the scientific information is there, science has advanced to a certain level. For example, at the cadastral level, we don't have the information, like 10 by 10 scale. At the village level, we don't have that. At least by 25 by 25 grid scale you have. But then that's certainly, but science is advancing, and how do they kind of keep pace with this knowledge? That's the biggest challenge what we have. And a bit of demystification of science should happen at that level. Who does it? That's another question, because government might not be having this kind of a wherewithal, the exposure at the district level. So it's important to train them on these aspects, to make them understand. That's part of the work what we've been doing at the district level. To start with that kind of a analysis, the projections what we have for the next 10 years at least, to see where the resources, how they're going to be affected in that particular circumstances. Secondly, lots of people are responsible for this, to kind of demystifying the science at that level. Journalists also play an important role. Media plays a very, very important role. There are lots of jargons floating around today. That's important to kind of speak the language where they could relate to. I mean, at the policy level, at the politicians' level, that interface, science policy interface is very, very critical. I think, that's an important area where we have to concentrate. Maybe we should have some workshops and other things specifically meant for the member of parliaments, the councillors and city administrators. I think that is a very important function, because everything starts with that science, that knowledge, because the plans what we make is based on those knowledge, and it is important to be on a sound ground. So I really see the importance of that. It's important to kind of invest more energy and time and train people on that. But again, it is a continuous process. It doesn't really end. I see there is a lot of value in that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And as we turn to Maria, I think it's an important point, translating science to languages that can be understood. Even running a science institute, I know most people don't read 20, 30-page detailed science peer-reviewed journals. We need to get it down to language that's understandable. Not to say that people don't understand the articles, but science can be complicated at the best of times. But from community level up, it needs to be understandable. Maybe I'll come back to the government colleagues afterwards, just to think of what would you recommend to the science community in terms of how they communicate But first, I'd like to just ask Maria to input there.
Thank you. And just to echo the point from Nandi, I think that one issue is the information flow between, and this goes for policy, from national, subnational to community, but it also goes in terms of the assessments and content, the knowledge that we in different sectors have, scientific sectors or in social sectors. And so I would argue we don't need more, I would argue there's not a lot of more knowledge gaps. What's holding us back is more, we're not looking in the right places. For instance, there's gender assessments or community gender assessments or resilience work that's being done that is not then shared or utilized in other sectors because we don't socialize the way that we should with different sectors. And this goes to the development sector or the disaster risk reduction sector or health that have these specific knowledge, pieces of knowledge of the puzzle that is needed. So one thing I was thinking also is maybe what is missing is a reciprocity, no, that's a wrong word, some sort of collection of what works. And Bangladesh has so many excellent examples, as all the panelists here do, of adaptation programs, local, that work for targeted populations and targeted groups. Those solutions, this solution-driven piece, is maybe something that we could expand on. When we are talking about sort of scientific assessment, I just also wanted to plug that working with data and statistics is very, very essential in these pieces. And I know national statistics bureaus are always engaged in these type of household surveys, et cetera. And this is where you can really look at where the climate-related factors impact. For instance, UN Women has done a research on gendered impacts of climate change, which has looked at the empirical evidence from Asia. Those type of knowledge pieces that maybe the climate sector isn't looking at because you're looking at us as gender actors, for instance. But that's a lot of content that is adaptable and usable for our broader goal.
Thank you for that. And I'm just conscious of time. I know we started a little late. We'll probably continue a little late into your coffee break. I hope that's okay. But I have one question to ask before we open it up to the audience as well. Maybe two questions before we open to the audience, so get your questions ready. But just very, very briefly now from the government representatives on that question of what barriers do you see to effective evidence-based science being integrated in policy dialogues? What can we do better? Whoever wants to have a quick response on that.
So you're asking what barriers?
Any barriers or what we can do in terms of making science more accessible?
Yes, we need, I mean, more fine-tuned focus knowledge for adaptation. And at the same time, it should be interdisciplinary. And it should focus on the real solutions on I mean, climate threat or vulnerability of the communities. So, barrier is that, I mean, when we are working with our communities and at the same time sectoral stakeholders, as we are integrating our national adaptation plan into our 9 provincial adaptation plans, nowadays we are preparing that. The main thing is that different provinces faces some of the some of the dry area provinces, they faces about the water shortage, and at the same time they cannot continue their agricultural livelihood as they have done previously. The wet areas, most of the flood damages and all. So I mean, when incorporating those community knowledges, we have a barrier because our professionals, we professors and all those, and at the same time the government government professional, we tend to think on the most the way that we have trained in the universities and the Western knowledge and all. So we think of in a different way. But other communities, they can in a holistic way. So we have developed some of the tools to make this problem to solve. That means to mobilize them and at the same time to open up a discussion or discourse so that all those different types of women and other influential groups and at the same time vulnerable groups, they come together and share the experiences. So we had incorporated these techniques into our Climate Smart Village program. We, to some extent, those were successful.
Okay, thank you. And I want to come to the final question we have on our list here, which is about finance. And then we'll have a question from the audience. But I'll open this up to the whole floor in the sense that how can financial resources and investments be optimized to support the work in adaptation? As I mentioned earlier, 1.3 trillion is going into fossil fuel explorations and fossil fuel subsidies, I should say. That's what's causing a lot of our problems and adaptations that we have to work on, yet we cannot get the resources we need to do it. So from government perspectives, from others' perspectives, how do we address this issue? How do we get the right financial resources? And I think it was mentioned earlier, the private sector is key in this. How do we engage private sector? So maybe we'll start at the far end of the table first with Marie. Oh, you want to go first, Dr. Shin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even if my major is not the financial and the governmental management, but I want to say two things to improve the financial status or governmental status for the climate change adaptation. First thing is that the climate change issue should be linked or cooperated with another problems, which means that as you know, the water problem is very, very related with the energy problems. Usually, government make their budget and the financial support for the water problem, to solve the water problem, and separately for the energy problem, and also urban problems. Therefore, I'm suggesting the government many times, we should think all problems together in one, the climate change action, including water, energy, and urban problems. Then they can share the financial budgets together. For example, as you know, for the water shortage, usually the power plant use the lots of waters. If they can save the water, we can reduce our budgets. And also, if the energy company or energy governmental department share their base budget for the climate change adaptation, to solve the climate change adaptation problems, they can make the more efficient way to make the financial, solve the financial problems. Second thing is that I'm suggesting to the government and also local government, we should define the technologies and the scientific budgets. For example, high technology and medium technology, and also the adaptive technologies, which means that for solving the climate change adaptation problems in local area, usually they use the adaptive technologies like a water tank and the low impact development technique or green infrastructures, something like that. But sometimes to solve the flood warning problems, they need very high technologies, depending on the budgets, like artificial intelligence or smart sensors or ICT technologies. Therefore, I think to solve the financial problems, we need to think more effective or some precise, appropriate manners to do that. Okay, that's my opinion.
Thank you for that. I'll leave the floor open to who wants to take the questions. Lil, you want to go ahead? And Nambi?
Yes, this financing and investment as far as this is concerned, very much important. So we have access to this global financing mechanisms to GCF, Adaptation Fund and JEF funding and some other funding. So far we are very successful. We are implementing some of the readiness projects, NDA readiness and NAP readiness projects, and 2 big scale JEF funded projects or GCF funded projects also. One more thing is that we have identified, that was well identified in our National Environmental Action Plan, so that we should have a complementary mechanism so that our resources to be mobilized in this adaptation, resilience building on all those related things, because by having money is not enough, because investment, so we have to invest in ecosystem services, we have to invest in traditional knowledge, we have to invest in most delicate social relationships, what is much needed to build the community resilience as a whole. So we have made our platform more broadened so that much broader resource mobilization is there. No one is left behind and all are inclusive there. So resource mobilization in that sense is a technique that we can support all other enablers. In that sense, so it will be ultimately have a more resilient complementary economy so that our objectives can be met easily. Thank you.
Thank you. Nambi.
Hello. Yeah. Again, I'll share from my experience the baby steps we have taken. Apart from the MDBs and bilateral money, what you have, what could be done domestically is also important to understand. One of the things what we try to do is, India has come out with a National Action Plan on Climate Change, and it is a mandatory for the state action, for the states to kind of come out with their own action plans. It was rolled out a decade ago. Then there is no support of money from that, for that particular work. It's a kind of a standalone document without money. Every state has prepared that. But to what end? That's the thing we want to really focus on when we came out with the resource mobilization strategy for each of those states, wherever we are working in the 5 states, to kind of understand the landscape of existing finance first, to take stock of that from the private sector, public sector, what kind of money is available, what additionality is needed. That kind of an audit has to happen. We started with that. And then, it is also important to have this climate budget tagging exercise to be done, because the relevance of climate activities, typically it's on the development sector, kind of an approach what we have. How do we kind of, see what kind of climate relevance each of those stream of expenses that have in the budget. So it also helps them to kind of, in all the ministries, environment is one of the weakest links. They don't talk much to the finance, and they don't even know what to ask sometimes. So it is important for them to understand those. So we kind of we pilot tested with this with few sectors, agriculture, water, and energy, to see, where the money is going, at least. It's work in progress. Maybe that will inform the environment department to kind of, to ask the right kind of money. And that's one of those exercises we have undertaken. And then there are other sources of internal money, but these are peanuts compared to what is needed. But still, it is important to, for example, India has come out with a policy of, 5% mandatory money should be contributed from CSR for CSR activities from the corporate sector. So that money is typically spent on education and health. It's not that they are not important, but we need to see how health and climate change, the connections between those things and how to kind of link those things. And there is another source of money which is found is the Member of Parliament's Local Area Development Fund. This typically, it goes to kind of, different kinds of activities. Now there is a little bit of focus we're bringing so that they could spend on climate-sensitive sectors. So these are some of the examples I could think of. But one thing is, everybody talks about, every Tom, Dick, and Harry talks about finance and resilience and stuff, but when it comes to money, there's not much here. I know yesterday I met the private sector people here. I mean, it's important to kind of identify the bankable projects, convert those vulnerabilities and see them, to kind of convert them into projects. Only then adaptation is largely seen as a public good. So there is very little attraction for private sector. How do you kind of strengthen those things? There was a couple of people yesterday, I saw them from Singapore, AIGS or something. They're a bit disheartening for them to kind of, to push their agenda, but not much of takers. That's the kind of feedback I got from them. That speaks volumes, and we need to really be very sensitive to these things and try some practical means to approach this money. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting topic there. And also, maybe in the responses coming, how do we get it down to the most vulnerable and at-risk communities? A lot of people want to invest, they want immediate returns, but it's a challenge at that level. So, any thoughts?
Many thoughts. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And really, the issue for us, for UN Women and UNEP in this joint initiative that we're working on, is looking at how to, precisely what you're saying, how to trickle down investment that goes to renewable or low carbon technologies, entrepreneurs in climate sensitive areas. We see women as agents of change, but not other people do. We see gender as a prerequisite for effective adaptation plans, but again, it seems not others always do. And what we don't want is this sort of vulnerability conundrum. We want to provide options for women to build their own climate resilient livelihood options. And this is what we think will be what drives development. The issue for women is that they don't access the investments that exist or the loans made available. The size of the loans that women entrepreneurs need is so much smaller than what a standard loan size from an investment facility is. So we're talking local, like. And that makes it operationally challenging for financial institutions to roll out schemes. So from what we've done in the Empower program, and this is a plug, but it's also where we think is a solution lever, is we've created a regional investment facilities which actually provides access to finance for commercially viable enterprises across the region, targeting women and marginalized groups. So Empower program with UNEP and UWomen, we act as the first loss tranche, meaning we'll absorb the risk that these financial institutions do not want to take because they do not want to invest in these low, in their minds, high risk initiatives. This will allow other investors to join, meaning that the risk is lowered for them, but the actual growth of the fund increases. So more money for more businesses, basically women-led, women-driven. And this is a revolving fund, so it will just be replenished. And we're working together with a entity called Nexus for Development to do this. And this has been piloted in Bangladesh, it's been piloted in Vietnam and in Cambodia, and we're working with government investment opportunities too. So here we're really talking about ensuring that women get the access to those finances that exist. If they have the means to build their own climate resilient business, and we've seen them be able to do that, we have enough evidence to show that, we are talking about also advancing on sustainable development and economic growth using climate resilient mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Shin.
Yes. Actually, I want to comment one more thing is that in terms of the financial problems related to the climate change actions, I think one of the most important things is that how we can, our companies, private sectors, should be changed to familiar with the climate change actions. About 3 months ago, I made like a forum for the ESG forum. At that time, there are about 50 companies, majors, that are getting around. And then I asked them, do you know the NDC problems in the world? First question. Second question is that if you invest your benefit to the climate change action, do you know is there something green taxonomy or something like that? And the third question is that will you join for the action of the climate change adaptation in terms of the finance or in terms of the activities? But they said yes, which means that the Korean government and the local government, also I'm working to educate the governmental, private company guys to provide their benefit monies, the share, the climate change actions. And then I think that is one of the important things. We cannot depending on our finance onto the governmental money and taxes. Therefore, the money company should share their money for our global problems together. Therefore, that is very important thing which I'm thinking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm very happy if they would share their funds with us and help us invest in better adaptation at community level. I just want to check if there's any burning questions amongst the audience here. We have a chance to ask a question. And if you do so, please raise your hand and say who you are. I'm not seeing that many hands. Not seeing any hands. Oh, we have one hand over here. I think there's a microphone out there.
Good morning. My name is Sohee Kim, and I'm working for APAN Secretariat. Actually, my question goes to Mr. Nambi, India. I think it's really important that you pointed out the limitation or challenge of NAP, National Adaptation Plans, when it comes to the sub-national level implementation. And could you give us an example or your idea about like what would be a good instrument or enabler to mainstreaming the climate risk information or climate adaptation to sub-national level or even local level implementation? Thank you.
As you know, adaptation cuts across sectors, right? It is agriculture, water, energy. There are so many sectors involved in this. So typically, we have a tendency to look at it from the development perspective, normally, without factoring climate information into that. So that is what you mean by mainstreaming within at all levels. There are different levels of scales you were talking about, but certainly that's important to bring that climate angle to that. That is where we are in, and it is also important. We can't avoid that. Agriculture traditionally has looked into the weather patterns and stuff, but not really the in-depth knowledge is there. For example, the farmers knows that something is happening. They know something is happening because of their own traditional knowledge or whatever. But they can't act upon whatever they have as knowledge base is not helping them at the scale at which is happening today. So that information flow, there are three things when you talk about mainstreaming, this information, institutions, and investments. These are very critical in terms of resources we should really see. How do you tweak the institutions to better plan and operate and help the communities in some sense? And the information, as I mentioned, there is a forecast, and you have to really be very clear about that and what you deliver and how useful they are. So these are some of the approaches what we have, but there might be many more.
Anybody else would like to ask a question? We have a hand at the back here. Please come up.
Yes, good morning. I'm Lani Rebagay from Asian Farmers Association. I would like to fully support the point raised by Maria that really farmers, particularly women, need small amount of fund. No? But the role of family farmers organization or federated cooperative is to do the retailing of this to their women member. That's why my question is, how are the farmers federated structure or cooperatives have been engaged in making this climate resilient enterprise fund to women? And of course, I also fully support the idea of making this science, this information, farmer-friendly. And of course, also in this context, the role of farmer federation organized from the local level to regional level helps in translating this document into local language. So how are the farmers' organization are given institutionalized participation in these spaces? Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you so much. And it would be great to talk to you after this. Yes, so when we're working on this type of programming, we work in climate climate vulnerable areas, specifically in the target countries, but we're expanding to other countries, where we work specifically also with community, civil society groups and women's groups who live and engage in those communities, where we then match them with the entrepreneurs who may be farmers or who are farmers. We work with cooperatives, and it is very likely that in some of the areas that we're operating, that we are working through a farmer collective. And I want to commend the work you're doing to also target women farmers for the interventions that you're doing. But bringing in the different actors, and this links to the broader point of the whole of this session, it is multidisciplinary. There's so many people that need to be at this table to have this conversation, to make sure that everyone is part of it. So absolutely, we do target the those farmers who work in sort of climate-sensitive areas and who are women or from marginalized groups. So thank you for raising that point.
Thank you. And just while I want to add to that question, actually, but while I'm talking to that question, if you could think of 2 or 3 key reflections that you'd like to give back to the audience, thinking about COP28 that's coming up, what do we want to say or to feed back to the processes that, is going to help us look at adaptation and resilience for all? It's going to help us look at driving the support to adaptation, the finances, but also across all these enablers. So what are the key reflections you'd like to give back? If you want to take a minute to think about that, we can give you 2 minutes each to feed back. But on the question just asked, I think also one of the issues that I would like to say, and as a moderator you don't normally talk, but this is a very interesting area. How do you get finances down to the vulnerable communities? And I think the first thing we have to do is change the architecture of the financial systems. It's been designed by finance for finance to make finance. We need to make sure that we're working on a client-centric and a bottom-up approach to understanding what are the technologies and what are the capacities of communities to absorb finances, and how do we support them to do that. So they need to be brought into the process of helping to refine and redefine the financial products that are being developed, the financial infrastructures that are there, working with the MFIs and other institutions. So we're in the process of working on that across a number of countries in the region to really make it a bottom-up approach, and we are working in a gender transformative process in this. How do you change the barriers that exist? How do we actually turn this around so that it's fully inclusive in the development of such kind of financial products? So very happy to engage both with you and Moomin and yourself as well on this, and many others. But it's a key component of how do we actually bring adaptation and resilience for all. If we don't get it to the communities, it's not for all, it's for the elite. So, if you want to close and have a cup of coffee, which I'm sure everybody does, if you want to just go from, well, we'll go from left to right. I'm not quite sure which way this is from your end or my end, but we'll start with Nambi. But if you have a few quick reflections, what do you tell people now what we have to do?
I think, it is important to invest in capacity building and training, because it has several components. Maybe the access to finance is one thing, and then the demystification of science, what I talked about, is also critical. I think these are some of the areas. Of course, there is some money interest flowing in, and there is money flowing in, but it's not adequate. If you really want to, at the community level, it's all very, very important to integrate this. I just want to quote a good thing now, which came out, profound statement which came from my guru, the chief architect of Indian Green Revolution, Professor Swaminathan. I asked the same question, how it is successful, how you do manage to kind of, make a green revolution successful. He said the policy, technology are essential in the government, and the buy-in from the government is all important, but all the more important is the farmers' participation and enthusiasm. It's a symphony. He calls it a symphony. So that's kind of, resonates very much with what you're doing today. If your resilience is everybody's business. It's not about, the government alone can't do anything much. So it's important for people to kind of really realize that, understand that, contribute to this whole process. It's happening, but it's all happening in bits and pieces. So it's important to harness that knowledge and energy there to kind of, to develop on their own.
Thank you for that. It just reminds me of somebody else, when you talk about symphony, somebody else is talking about cacophony. It's nicer to have it all aligned and working together than just talking over each other, so inclusion. Sorry,
yeah, my reflection is that because lot of knowledges and practices are still there, but not utilized for, enhancing the adaptive capacities of the communities. So those are available in my country, and at the same time, other countries also. We should have some mechanism, strong, vibrant mechanism, so that to share our experiences and apply across the borders to have this new concept of transformative adaptation, because it is we have to be more sharp and more focused and results oriented, and at the same time ultimately we should have, we have come to the position that it is not a global warming, it is global boiling now. So we have to be very smart in those things, and at the same time, as Dr. Nambi said, across the scales and subnational levels and all the things, capacity building at the same time. So these are our message, I think we should bring to the COP28. We should have more vibrant discourse there so that we can have effective transformative adaptation across the sectors.
Thank you very much. Dr. Shin?
Okay, I think this is my final remarks. Yeah, actually, I understand like this. We are faced on the climate changes in terms of the natural disasters and also some social problems, and there are so many sectors. But I think we should better think more about working together and sharing our knowledge in the central government and also local government over the world, which means that I think we can solve. I'm a very positive guy. We can solve our problem, our climate crisis. Then, how we can make our more sustainable green growth future in the world, in terms of the sharing our knowledges and technologies, and also our experiences. That is a very, very important thing we should pursue in the future generation. That's my final comment. Simple comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think
Sanjay.
that integration of all strategies, policies, and inclusion of all societal members in our mainstreaming all is very essential. And another thing, before COP28, I believe that to identify and define what is actually climate finance is very important at this time. And another thing, that what actually our target need to finalize. And another thing, before COP28, as you know, that recent JEF conference, that there is another financial arrangement for Kunming Biodiversity Framework, GBF, but still now, for climate change addressing, no separate funding, loss and damage funding. This is now in front of us. I believe this is the major issue for us. And if we cannot define climate finance, this is major challenge for access to finance for us. And another thing, I believe that access to finance, specifically GCF funding, the system is so complicated. We need is a simplification process, because it takes 2 to 3 years time to access climate finance. It needs to simplify. This all about. And another thing, respect to farmers. In our case, what the question raised, that we believe that every farmer is a scientist in our country, and we believe that in our country, as you know, that 175 million population producing 40 million crops a year. And mainly we believe that the real fighter is our farmers. Is need to respect them. And another thing to respect to in our all plan strategies, inclusion of women. We believe the 15% is our women. And recently gender action plan, we give priority to separate gender action plan to address them. This all about, I think, that need to inclusion. And main thing that actions, solutions, though adaptation, of course, is the country specific, but sharing of knowledge with regional, sub-regional, international is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Maria.
Yes, thank you. I will be quick so we can go for coffee. COP, message to COP. The key message is ensuring an intersectional, gender-responsive adaptation approach. So it's a prerequisite, especially for local adaptation. I want to highlight also one thing that we haven't mentioned just yet, but doesn't mean we won't, because I will now. The importance of young people, young entrepreneurs, and it's embedded when we talk about diverse groups. And all of you have thought about this for sure, everyone on this panel, but we had a session yesterday where two young entrepreneurs from Nepal and Vietnam spoke, and this is where also the solutions come to ensure that this work will continue. So it's not just about, oh, we need to listen to the young people and then we do something. It is also to get as many people involved in developing gender-responsive livelihood options for built on climate resilient spaces. That's absolutely essential. So that would be the message to COP. Let's bring some good solutions to the table.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Okay, I think we have to draw it to a close. I'm supposed to give a summary of this, but I think it would be hard to summarize what has been said over the last hour and a half. But just in the last couple of seconds, it was just interesting to hear few words which I think are important. One was symphony, and I like the idea of everything working in sync together. It's really important to try and bring all of these various cogs and wheels together. It's complex. So I think there's a lot of lessons that we learned today. Positivity. If we don't focus on this with some positive aspects, there's a lot to be worried about. There's a lot of anxiety amongst people, but we need to remain positive that we will find the right solutions. And with people like the speakers here today, I think we've got a great start on that. So really appreciate that. Respect for farmers. I think respect is a huge word. I think it's not just for farmers, but maybe farmers, for women, for indigenous community, for the youth. We've got to respect them and integrate in an inclusive manner all their thoughts in the process. I think it's really important. And if I had any message for COP, amongst all the message you've given, probably in a simple way I'd say COP on. It's time to change. It's time to stop this being about fossil fuels and industry. It's about time for resilience for the communities that need it. So COP28, COP on, and focus on the needs of the people. With that, I'll say a big thank you to the panel, and maybe a round of applause for all of our speakers here today. So thank you, Nambi, Neil, Chin.